Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Spy Weaver again here with True Spy Gaming. And today we're going to be taking a look on what is on the horizon out there. We're going to kind of look into what the Blizzard is planning on doing here in 7.1.5 for the Retribution Paladin. I do note might be a rather short guide, if you even want to call it a guide, but all I'm going to basically be doing is just going over the changes that are currently on the PTR and what looks like will be happening to the Retribution Paladin going forward. Do also note I'm not going to really include any numbers per se and say A is better than B going forward, just because once again this is currently what is just on the PTR, and we're just taking a look into what it might look like if the current PTR build goes live. As always, once everything does go live, I will come out with the live version of the guide. That's where you're going to see your hard stats and numbers. That's where you're going to see everything that'll help you make the choices. But, like I said, this is just going to be a straight up look into what 7.1.5 is potentially looking like for the Retribution Paladin. So sit down, strap in, and grab a drink. Let's take a look at the 7.1.5 Retribution Paladin changes. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking with us here. Jumping into a look ahead for the Retribution Paladin in 7.1.5. For the most part, the Retribution Paladin spec avoided all sorts of nerf batons in this patch, or in this PTR patch that is currently on the PTR, of course. The biggest changes that will directly affect the Retribution Paladin, however, are the new Legendaries and changes to current Legendaries. But before I get into that, let's look at the specific class changes to the Retribution Paladin. For the specialization or the base talents themselves, there's only one that is currently being changed. It is technically a tooltip update versus a buff of sorts. Essentially, it is updating it to state that it creates a barrier of holy light that absorbs X amount of damage for 15 seconds. When it's consumed, all damage absorbed is dealt as holy damage divided across all enemies within 8 yards. Current data mines and looks into the PTR are showing that the multiplicative for the Shield of Vengeance damage is going from attack power times 10 to attack power times 20. Now, whether or not that is just the tooltip update itself versus an actual buff is yet to be seen. As I said, I'm not going to really dive into the numbers too hard in this guide. This is just a look ahead to see what is coming. But that one is out there. I've tested a little bit on the PTR, of course, by standing in front of that Raider's dummy, letting it whack you in the back until it explodes the shield and seeing what it does. It really doesn't seem to be doing that much different than it is currently doing on live. So is that a fact of how they're changing the scaling of secondary stats on the PTR versus what they are in live? Or did it actually get buffed? Is it just a tooltip? It's yet to be seen. But just keep in mind that Shield of Vengeance is either just getting a tooltip update or a damage increase, but it still probably won't be felt either way. The next changes that are actually happening to the spec itself come into the talents. It seems they have finally listened to us about some other talents, providing for a little more diversity in the spec. Divine Hammer's damage is changing from 45% to 90% holy damage instantly and every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. Still generates 2 holy power. So by base looking at these calculations, you can see it goes from 45% to 90%. Essentially, it is getting buffed by 100%. It's getting doubled, the Divine Hammer damage. There's been some interesting speculation on this itself that maybe this will allow Divine Hammers to pull ahead in single target criteria and single target fights. However, my personal looks at it and testing around with the PTR, even though it does more damage, it generates holy power at a slower rate. This goes back to the whole Zeal versus Fires of Justice idea. Zeal does more damage but generates holy power at a slower rate than Fires of Justice. Essentially, it's going to come down to your spec, how you're built, and what legendaries you have. If you have the cape, you're still going to favor a faster holy power generation or a more middle-of-the-road holy power generation versus high damage abilities. That meaning you're going to favor something along the lines of maybe Fires of Justice and Divine Hammers over Zeal and Divine Hammers, or Fires of Justice and Blade of Wrath over a Zeal and Blade of Wrath build. Essentially that. You're going to want either a more middle road or a faster, just for the main fact that you want to generate that holy power faster so you can get another Templar's Verdict off before your cape buff drops. But that is a given going forward. Either way, Divine Hammer damage is getting buffed. The next talent that's getting their damage buffed is that of Execution Sentence. It is currently 1100% of attack power. In the PTR, it's being buffed to 1700% of attack power. It still solely follows from the damage, dealing the holy damage after the 7 seconds or X amount of time when it hits the target. So it still doesn't deal damage after it's cast, it deals damage when it hits the target, but the damage it deals is being buffed. It can create an interesting look going forward. We might want to start looking at using Execution Sentence. However, do keep in mind that Templar's Verdict still gets buffed from your Ashbringer, and then on top of that, Final Verdict buffs all those other previous buffs. I do like seeing the fact that Execution Sentence is getting a little bit of love. I don't think it's enough, but they're on the right, on the right track here. They do need to increase Execution Sentence damage for it to actually, for us to even actually look at wanting to use it. So there's a possibility that there's going to be a few different reworks on how or what talents we're going to take in a PvE situation. Last change to the talents is that specifically of Word of Glory. They specifically just changed the amount of healing it does. 900% of spell power up to 1200% of spell power. Honestly, I still believe that you're not going to be taking this talent just for the main fact that it is a loss of holy power, thus a loss of DPS. Anytime you're not using holy power on that Templar's Verdict, especially when you have the cape, you're straight up losing DPS. I get some people want to sit here and say I'm being, I'm increasing my utility, thus I'm helping out the raid by using Word of Glory, healing myself or another raid member. Yeah, good, and all, but if that 1 to 2 mil healing, give or take, that you're going to do over the course of the fight has a greater impact on your healer's mana than killing the boss 30, 60 seconds sooner, because you're using your holy power on damage instead of the heal. Where's it balance out? I almost believe if the healers, if it's that big of a deal, the healers need to look at doing something different. But that's just me personally. It might not be across the board. That, again, the road of talents that Word of Glory is in anyways is use what you want to use, because none of them essentially increases our DPS. Using one over the other can just lose you DPS. As far as PvE, talent and spec-wise, it's all that's really being changed. They are changing an Honor talent, just changing the cooldown of Blessing of Sanctuary from 25 seconds to 30 seconds. But like I said, I specifically focus on PvE, so that's really of no consequence to me. However, let's jump to the biggest changes that we're going to see forward. We're going to start with the new Legendaries coming out. For Paladins specifically, there's seemingly only one that is going to benefit the Retribution Paladin for Paladin-specific Legendaries. Shoulder Piece. called Ashes to Dust, 910 eye level, 700 crit, 525 haste. Thank God it has crit haste. We love that. Equip effect, enemies hit by your Wake of Ashes take 20% increased damage from you for 6 seconds. Now, what does this mean? Is this going to overtake any other current legendaries? I personally do not believe so, simply because we only get 3, 4, maybe 5 Wake of Ashes casts off in a fight. 5 times that 6 at your max is you're just getting a 30 seconds of increased 20% damage. Granted, that can be good, if you get it during Crusade, which would lead us to, explore options. Say if you have the Ashes to Dust shoulders, do you pop Crusade, get your 15 stack, then pop your Wake of Ashes and stack that 20% increased damage on top of your Crusade damage? It's possible. There's different playing around that can go on with this. However, it's not as static as something like the cape, which happens throughout the fight constantly, since you're constantly using Templar's Verdict, or our free holy power generating ring that in most cases allows us to use Zeal over Fires of Justice, because we're getting 3 to potentially 5 free Templar's Verdicts during the Wings phase. The next new legendary for Retribution Paladins will be trinkets. They are introducing 3 different trinkets: a DPS trinket, a healing trinket, and a tank trinket. The DPS trinket, 910 as well, as all legendaries have been upped to. Kill Jaden's Burning Wish gives us 2,157 strength, as well as 389 crit, 389 haste, and 389 mastery. So you're saying, okay, it is a glorified stat stick, but it also has an on-use effect. On-use effect launches a vortex of destruction that seeks your current enemy. When it reaches the target, it explodes, dealing critical strike to all enemies within 10 yards for X amount of fire damage. On PTR, this was hitting for anywhere between 2 mil to 2.6 mil when I was using it on the training dummies. The cooldown is 1 minute and 15 seconds. So if you just kind of rough napkin math that out, just go, 6-minute fight for easy figures. You can figure you're going to use it 5 times, does 2.5 million damage 5 times, 12.5 million extra damage during the fight. Look at any of your logs from current fights to see what is happening over a 6-minute fight and what is, where that would fall in roughly. Just like I said, some quick napkin math there to figure it out for you. But those are the 2 new ones: Kill Jaden's Burning Wish, a trinket, as well as Ashes to Dust, the shoulders that increase our damage by Wake of Ashes. However, they are also reworking some current legendaries. Proc changes, I should say. Shared across all classes, Agramar's Stride is changing to increase your movement speed by 75% of your haste, or critical strike, whichever is higher. Alright, so that helps out some other classes that were plate wearers that favored critical strike. It'll also help out the crit stacking Retribution Paladins. Either or, okay, it just gives you a faster movement speed buff. Not going to really be anything that's going to increase your DPS. Kill Jaden's Burning Wish did have its explosion changed to a critical strike. Sifu's Secret, the other paladin one that we can obtain, the meme ring as I like to call it. Successfully applying a loss of control effect to an enemy, interrupting an enemy, or dispelling any target. Grants you 70% increased movement speed and 25% haste for 10 seconds. The effect may occur once every 30 seconds. So what does this mean? This now means that not do we only have to apply a loss of control effect to the enemy, we can simply just interrupt an enemy or dispel a target. As paladins, Retribution Paladins I should say, we cannot dispel the targets, we can only interrupt, is where it'll help us out. It's still not going to be enough, however, to have it overtake some of the other legendaries that we will now be able to use, as well as some of the other reworks that are happening. such as the following: Justice Gaze also getting buffed. Hammer of Justice deals 600% holy damage and has a 75% reduced cooldown when used against an enemy above 75% health. Reverse Cleave. However, with this buff, you still do not want to use Justice Gaze because it still needs to be used on use the Hammer of Justice, excuse me, if you have the helmet, because the target does need to be stunned. Uther's Guard is more tank. However, the Retribution effect of it is being changed that your Blessing of Freedom and Blessing of Protection have 50% increased duration and heal the target for 15% of their maximum health. Big whoop, really, if you ask me. It's not going to be game-changing. It's not going to be something that we're going to want to prioritize over other legendaries. However, the biggest one that is hitting for the Retribution Paladin is the belt rework. Retribution. The belt rework the belt used to increase duration of your Blessing of Freedom and Blessing of Protection by 50%. Now, for Retribution, Avenging a Wraith increases healing done by an additional 70% and increases damage done by an additional 25%. The belt now additionally buffs our wings. It also stacks with Crusade because that 25% hits before the Crusade stack. So you have the 25% as soon as you pop your wings, and then your Crusade percentage increase stacks on top of that. This is such a huge increase. Take the damage you currently deal with your wings, times it by 1.25, and that's a rough estimation of how much damage that your wings would be doing with the belt in the current PTR build or the current rework if this hits live. That is honestly going to be the big one. That being said, I believe it is going to end up something like this for our legendaries if, once again, the 7.1.5 PTR changes are pushed to live as is. We're going to have the belt be number 1, even though it's only during your wings. It's such a massive increase at a time where we deal such a massive amount of damage. It's ridiculous. It'll make our peaks that much higher. That is insane. The number 2 then will still be the cape. It's consistent over the whole fight. Number 3, I would argue, will have the Kill Jaden's trinket, because that is also throughout the whole fight, dealing, like I said, roughly 12 million damage, give or take. Some rough brain math there for you over the course of the fight. 6-minute fight, that is, of course. And then after that, I would put the ring at number 4. Your free holy power generating ring, Lyrdan's Fury Unleashed during Avenging Wraith. And then 5th, DPS increasing would be the shoulders, of course, because, like I said, the 20% increased damage for 6 seconds after you use Wake of Ashes. That being said, that is really all that is currently in the PTR for the Retribution Paladin as far as changes go. Like I said, the spec itself is avoiding any sort of nerf batons. Overall, they are looking at reworking scaling of secondary stats. But the biggest changes that you're going to see and feel with the Retribution Paladin will be the reworks to the Legendaries themselves, as well as the addition of 2 more Legendaries to the Retribution Paladin pool, per se. Both of which will be DPS increases, and both of which you'll want to prioritize over other things such as the helmet, the risks, meme rings, if it was a secret, so on and so forth. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is a look ahead into the Retribution Paladin in 7.1.5. Really not too much changes for the spec itself. Things aren't really going to change a whole lot as far as playstyle goes. Once again, granted, the current PTR patches are pushed to live as is. Granted, realize we could still be a month and a half out of 7.1.5 hitting live, so these changes are still could happen. But that is how it currently is looking. Once again, the Retribution Paladin is basically going to stay the same as is spec-wise. The only changes we're going to feel will be in the way of legendaries. Other than that, I still expect to see us topping meters quite regularly. Because, let's be honest, Retribution Paladin is just ridiculously OP. Fact of life. But anyways, would like to thank you for sticking with me here. Go ahead and drop the like if you enjoyed this video. Give me a follow. I'm going to increase the amount of videos I'm putting out. Starting this week, actually, I do plan on starting to get a weekly fails video out with our guild raids, because who doesn't like to laugh, or random mythics I run, etc, etc, because laughing's good. It is the best medicine ever, and hell, we need it in this day and age, because what the fuck is happening, America? But that's all I'm gonna say. But anyways, drop that like, subscribe here on YouTube, give me a follow over on Twitter at TrueSpyGaming. This is Spy with TrueSpyGaming signing off. Until next time, folks, stay frosty.